And for ticket information, go to motorracingnetwork.com.
Sprint Cup Racing on Rock 104.9. Make your fantasy NASCAR pick at rock104rocks.com.
PEK Fairview, broadcasting 24/7 at 880therevolution.com and on iHeartRadio.
From the Ed Sullivan Theater in New York, The Late Show with David Letterman. Top 10 list.
Let's get it started.
Let's get it started. Let's get it started in here.
Start the school year with a tech upgrade at Office Max. Save big on the new Dell 15.6-inch touchscreen laptop for just $399.99. This incredible price includes LoJack for laptops anti-theft security for 90 days. Details in-store or at OfficeMax.com.
Get it started.
Office Max. The hot deals start here. Offer ends August 17th. Restrictions apply.
O'Reilly.
Eventually, it's going to happen. You'll turn the key and your engine won't start. Don't lose your ability to get around. Visit O'Reilly Auto Parts for a Super Start battery. Whether it's a reliable economy, hard-working premium, or powerful extreme, you'll find it at an everyday low price. Don't let a dead battery slow you down. Visit O'Reilly Auto Parts. Better parts, better prices every day.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Little known facts about hell. Did I open it up, Paul? I never know.
Sure you
Okay,
did, yeah.
Here we go. Number 10, little known facts about hell. Front door, Turkey. Back door, Trenton. Did you know that? There's a back door in Trenton. Hell, yeah. Number 9, it's loosely modeled after Kennedy Airport's Delta Terminal. Number 8, most people are there for loitering. Number 7, Gate of Hell smells like a Yankee candle store. Smells like a Yankee candle store. Number 6, people give away endings to films without saying, spoiler alert. Number 5, little known facts about hell. High temperature and humidity, good for sinuses. I didn't say they were funny, I said they were little known. These are little known facts about hell. Number 4, considering ban on large sodas. Number 3, everyone shares one bathroom. Number 2, little known fact about gates of hell, waiters are extra chatty. Oh my God. And the number 1, little known fact about hell, after recent takeover, was renamed Trump Hell.
Don't forget to join Dave tonight for the best of the Late Show. Dave's guests, Matt Damon and Hani El Khatib. That's tonight on the CBS Television Network. Copyright 2013. Worldwide Pants Incorporated.
Hello, America, and welcome to Pivot Point, a show bringing you diverse views on the news. Well, there's been a lot going on in the news this week. What's been especially disturbing to watch is the crisis happening in Egypt. The crackdown on unarmed protesters, some of whom include journalists, has been disturbing indeed. And so we've got to pay attention to what's going on, and it'll be interesting to see whether democracy does evolve from the Arab Spring. In other news, Cory Booker actually won the Democratic primary in this state Senate race in New Jersey. So it will be incumbent upon all New Jerseyans to ask the right questions. And the right questions of Cory Booker are not whether or not he got a celebrity endorsement from Oprah. It is absolutely focused on the issues. Oprah was reported to have said that she knew that she was going to give a fundraiser for Cory Booker because she believed that he has the it factor, Well, I think while Oprah is great on celebrity-ism, identifying who has that kind of cachet that might go over well in Hollywood, the question becomes, what are the policy issues, and where does Cory Booker stand on Social Security and Medicare and other issues related to Wall Street? And so with that, today we're going to actually segue into another important topic, and that is ALEC, the organization that has been, the conservative organization, I should say, that has been focused on perpetuating stand your ground laws, the law that became famous because it was used in the George Zimmerman defense in his killing of certainly the young man down in Florida who died unnecessarily because of, in part, stand your ground laws, which have been put forth across the country by ALEC as an appropriate law for states. ALEC has also proposed laws that have tried to limit the franchise. They've been behind voter ID laws and laws that actually restrict the ability to vote in many states around the country. And so there is a battle going on between progressive organizations and conservative organizations, including ALEC, around the role that ALEC has played. And so today we're going to talk to Lisa Graves. She is the executive director of the Center for Media Democracy, publisher of PR Watch, and alecexposed.org. We'll also hear in the later hours from Emmanuel Herman, who is the deputy director of MoveOn.org. They are organizing around this issue. And Austin Thompson of the SEIU. They have also had a lot to say about this. And so we have an exciting show, a great lineup of very informed individuals. And with that, I'd like to welcome Lisa Graves. Lisa, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me on. We're happy to be able to talk to your listeners about this.
Lisa, Senator Durbin sent not too long ago a letter to 300 corporations who have been supporters of ALEC. And in that letter, he was asking them their position on stand your ground. I understand that he plans to have a hearing in the fall, and he wants to put these corporations on record for possibly supporting stand your ground laws. What's going on?
Well, the list that Senator Durbin sent to these two corporations, basically asking them if they are supporters of the Stand Your Ground law, is based on a lot of work that's been done by organizations to document which corporations have been funding ALEC over these past 5 or 10 years. And so while the right wing has had a flare-up over this letter, including an editorial in the Wall Street Journal and claims by Ted Cruz, the fact is that this is the sort of investigation that the Senate Judiciary Committee has often looked into to find out what's happening in a field of law and who is pushing for changes in that field of law. In this instance, these corporations are known to have funded ALEC at some point over the last 5 years as ALEC was pushing Stand Your Ground into law in the states. And Durbin's question is whether these corporations support Stand Your Ground or not. I think it's certainly a legitimate inquiry.
And so ALEC has actually responded with a letter of its own, correct?
That's right. ALEC is claiming that this impedes its associational rights or its rights as an association. We think that those claims are off base. The fact is that corporations are part of ALEC or not part of ALEC, regardless of what the senator's inquiry is. The senator is, according to his spokesperson, is merely trying to figure out, who's bankrolling these laws, who's pushing for these laws to be put in place. And a lot of corporations have actually dropped out of ALEC, 48 or 49, depending on the count, have left ALEC since we helped connect the dots between the Stand Your Ground law that was initially cited to prevent the arrest of George Zimmerman for killing Trayvon Martin, and which subsequently was cited to prevent the jury from convicting him. Since the controversy over that law arose, a number of corporations have left ALEC, and a number of nonprofits have left ALEC, as well as some politicians. And that's because that law is extraordinarily controversial. It, in my view, is an immoral law that puts the thumb of the NRA on the scale of justice to allow a criminal defendant or someone who would be a criminal defendant to prevent prosecution, to prevent arrest or prosecution. It also allows someone who killed someone with a gun to get civil immunity from suit. And under ALEC's provisions that were written in part by the NRA, if the family of a shooting victim sues and the killer gets immunity under this law and these new provisions, the family has to pay the attorney's fees and lost wages of the man who killed their child. I think that's fundamentally immoral.
That is very immoral. My question for you is, other than the NRA, why would other corporations and nonprofits actually become members of an organization like ALEC?
Well, what we uncovered after the whistleblower contacted me with the bills that had been voted on by ALEC, what we discovered was that at ALEC meetings, corporate lobbyists and elected officials were actually secretly voting behind closed doors on this legislation. So let me just say that again, because I still find it stunning to this day. What ALEC does is facilitate a process where corporations get, in its own words, an equal voice and vote on these policies. How that happens is that corporate lobbyists, special interest group reps, and lawmakers sit behind closed doors without the press or public present and actually vote on these bills to become a priority for ALEC lawmakers to push into law in their states. And what happens is, under ALEC's bylaws, ALEC's legislative leaders in the states are tasked with a duty to get these bills introduced and passed, made into binding law for the rest of us. Those bills are almost always introduced cleansed of any reference to the fact that they were ALEC bills or that they were pre-voted on by corporations at these ALEC meetings, where ALEC claims these are just meetings, these are tax write-offs for these corporations as a donation to a nonprofit. The groups that are there in the room voting with lawmakers don't report that as lobbying activity. And then ALEC sends emails to lawmakers urging them to get these bills introduced, which we consider to be lobbying, while ALEC claims that it is engaged in zero lobbying. It's told the IRS it spends not a penny on lobbying. That's why we in Common Cause and others, like the LTP, have filed letters and requests for complaints with the IRS to investigate ALEC's illegal lobbying. It lies to the IRS.
Actually, I'm going to play devil's advocate here because, a lot of organizations on the progressive side and on the conservative side engage in what they call education, and they can come up with, positions on policy. But if they're not actually specifying a specific bill, then it's not lobbying. So what makes what ALEC is doing lobbying?
Well, you're right. There are a lot of different ways that groups engage in public education. What's pretty unique about ALEC's method is this process in which corporations actually vote with politicians on legal language, on these bills. And quite frankly, if news broke, if some right-wing news source had some story that Harry Reid or Nancy Pelosi were secretly voting with the ACLU or Greenpeace, it'd be on Fox News every day until people lost their jobs or worse, were run out of office, because, quite frankly, secretly voting with corporations in a democracy, I think, is fundamentally anathema to what it means to be a democracy. Now, those bills that ALEC ratifies don't become law at those meetings, but then ALEC follows up. It writes emails to lawmakers that we've obtained, Common Cause has obtained, and others have obtained, in which they're asking for those bills to be introduced. That's the fundamental definition of lobbying, asking for bills to be introduced or passed. Yet ALEC reports to the IRS every single year that it engages in zero lobbying, not a penny.
And is it bills that they're saying that they're asking for to be introduced, or policy positions?
They're asking for their bill, the bill entitled Stand Your Ground, which used to be entitled Castle Doctrine, to be introduced. So I think it is distinct than mere public education, and it is quite frankly stunning that ALEC is a 501c3, unlike a lot of the organizations that do engage in public education efforts and have a lobbying arm. They don't have a separate 501c4, which is a separate type of nonprofit entity that they operate these operations out of. This is all coming through their charity under 501c3, which means that all of these donations are fully tax deductible by the members. That's not the case with unions, and it's not the case with organizations that actually properly classify their lobbying activity between their 501c3 or C4, or have so little activity that it's covered under their standard 501c3 exemption.
So let me ask you this. I think what I hear you saying is that the more than 300 corporations and nonprofits that have been a part of the ALEC organization have been actually not just complicit by the fact that they support ALEC, but they have been proactively engaged in saying that they support stand your ground laws and other laws that ALEC has supported, like voter ID restrictions.
Well, I think that's one of the questions that Senator Durbin has based on his letter is you support the operations of this organization that has spent 6+ years until recently pushing Stand Your Ground from bill into law. Do you support that law that your donations helped fund?
Okay, but I just want to clarify, because you were saying that they actually vote affirmatively on whether or not ALEC should prioritize these bills.
Oh, I'm sorry for that confusion. What happens at ALEC task force meetings is that the corporations that are on that task force vote in favor of bills becoming these model bills, these top priorities for becoming law. At the particular task force here, the Public Safety and Elections Task Force, the full list of which of those corporations were part of that task force is not known.
Okay.
We do know some of them. The NRA was a longtime member of that task force. Corrections Corporation of America was part of that task force. Walmart was part of that task force.
Wow.
The list of corporations that voted there is not known. And Walmart, as you know, is the largest retailer of ammunition in the world and the largest seller of long guns on the planet. It actually did drop out of ALEC last year after this controversy arose.
Ladies and gentlemen, Walmart, the place where you might buy your milk and your cookies, and you might also get your TV in your latest computer, also is a purveyor of firearms. And they actually sat on the committee that actually decided whether Stand Your Ground laws would be supported by ALEC. Is that what you're saying?
They were the co-chair.
They were the co-chair of the committee that determined whether Stand Your Ground laws would be supported by ALEC and perpetuated across the country.
That's correct. And in
that
fact,
is damning.
One of the little-known facts is that when these efforts to restrict voters were coming through ALEC in 2009 after the election of President Obama, and on the heels of record turnout by African Americans and students, Walmart had stayed on that committee but had stepped down from the chairmanship. And the chairman of that task force of ALEC at the time voter ID was ratified, these voter restrictions were ratified as a top priority, was the National Rifle Association.
Wow, that is simply amazing. Yet at the same time, not surprising, I suppose. I am surprised. I saw that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was a supporter of ALEC, and they pulled out in 2012. However, I'm wondering what they were seeking to accomplish through ALEC that had any general good.
Well, the Gates Foundation had given ALEC a grant of more than $300,000, and that grant was according to its description by the Gates Foundation, was focused on ALEC's Education Task Force. Well, ALEC's Education Task Force is one of the key movers and shakers in the effort to privatize public schools in this country. That task force has been co-chaired by for-profit school corporations. It has numerous bills that basically take our tax dollars and push them into for-profit corporations, so that one of the major sponsors of ALEC, a company called K-12, which describes its business as virtual schools, its CEO has been paid more than nearly $4 million in total compensation. Its company has made hundreds of millions of dollars cumulatively, primarily from Americans' tax dollars, and yet ALEC and ALEC's main special interest group, nonprofit companies, nonprofit members, have been vilifying teachers as being paid too much.
Mm-hmm.
So here you have an operation in which ALEC is fully invested in trying to privatize the American public education system. And by privatize, I mean not necessarily to your local Catholic school, but to for-profit companies that fund ALEC through bills like the so-called Virtual Schools Act. And these companies turn around and are paying their CEOs huge compensation packages. In fact, one of the most shocking things is the ALEC bill on virtual schools, if it's passed in whole, pays the school company the same amount per pupil as an actual brick-and-mortar school that has lunch ladies and air conditioning and blackboards and student council and athletics, while virtual schools have none of that. And the difference is profit. That's why they're able to pay their CEO for this Wall Street traded company founded by a Wall Street trader so much.
But that begs the question about the agenda of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We think of them and we think of their charitable work in Africa, and lesser known is their agenda for U.S. education. But is it aligned with the privatization movement?
Well, it's certainly helping to fund the privatization movement. That money to ALEC goes to its ALEC education agenda. Other nonprofit foundations are also funding that, including the Walton Foundation. So even though Walmart dropped out, the Walton family continues to fund ALEC's education agenda, and also some of the big money coming in is through Betsy DeVos from the Amway Family Foundation, Family Fortune. And so you have a couple of pretty wealthy millionaires or billionaires in this country who are helping to fund ALEC's education agenda, and at the top of ALEC's education agenda is privatizing American education. It also has a number of bills to make it harder for teachers to organize.
Wow. So, Lisa, my last question for you is, it just seems like the battle is now, I guess, ever since Citizens United and perhaps even before, the question of the role of C4s and now C3s in, I guess you would call it, perverting democracy is a big one. I mean, we see the IRS controversy happening right now in Congress about the role of C4s and whether the IRS had an eye out. And at the same time, there have been questions about C4s like Crossroads GPS. Do they have the 51% charitable intent or don't they that these C4s are supposed to have? And now you're actually saying that there are actual C3s, perhaps like ALEC, as you have described, that are not operating within the bounds of what the IRS regulations are. What is going on?
Well, I think that there's a lot of money sloshing around out there in the hands of some billionaire CEOs and some of these big corporations, and they want to change American public policy. ALEC for 40 years has provided a non-profit tax-deductible way to do so because people weren't paying attention to what they were really doing, which is operating as a corporate bill mill and really operating, in my view, as a lobbyist. Not only that, but ALEC gets these corporations to give donations to so-called ALEC scholarships, which fund the trips for lawmakers to come to these resorts and stay for a week with their spouses, and have their kids go to subsidized child care or outings in the city and get a tax write-off for doing so. So you have a lot of ways in which corporations are trying to distort public policy to serve their interests and not the people's interests. And ALEC is one of those vehicles that has been particularly effective because it has so many connections to these state legislatures where these battles are being fought over workers' rights, over the rights of Americans killed or injured by corporations, over our pensions. And so I think it's a huge problem. Now, the IRS, in its actual Inspector General report, was looking at prospective companies, or prospective nonprofits who wanted nonprofit status, and whether they were going to adhere to those rules. And it looks like, despite the outcry and furor, both progressive and conservative groups were examined by the IRS as part of its examination process to determine whether to grant that status. ALEC, however, has had that status for years and has operated stealthily as basically a group that funnels corporate lobbyist money into meetings with corporate lobbyists and lawmakers, and then helps push that legislative agenda in the states by asking for those bills to be introduced and passed.
Well, I've got to ask you this, since we deal with retirement security on this show. You mentioned pensions, and we have a retirement crisis in this country, and many state and local governments are actually moving away from defined benefit pensions, which are kind of like guaranteed pensions for workers for the rest of their lives, to defined contribution pensions, which are more like these 401k style things that will barely fund a retirement for several years past the date of stopping work. Are you saying that ALEC has had a role in that?
ALEC has definitely had a role in that. ALEC is in some ways obsessed with that. One of his agenda items this year is focused on targeting municipal pensions. ALEC also has key leaders that are involved in recalculating pension liabilities in ways that I think make those pension programs look bankrupt when they're not.
And the unions don't seem to have any sway against the influence of ALEC and other like-minded organizations and individuals?
Oh, I think on the contrary, the amount of public outcry over ALEC is growing. At the conference last week, there were more than 3,000 people, including hundreds and hundreds of union workers and other concerned citizens standing up against ALEC. That's 3,000 ralliers compared to fewer than 1,500 participants in the ALEC conference itself. That's an increase from the Oklahoma City conference this spring, where there were more than 1,000 people outside, including a number of labor organizations and individuals who are members of those labor organizations, compared with 500 ALEC members or participants inside. And so there's growing public awareness, and labor has been particularly strong in helping to educate people about ALEC and having people stand up against ALEC. And I think that while there have been some really hard battles in the Steel Belt or the Rust Belt this past 2 years, in terms of these governors who have been determined to crush unions regardless of the public sentiment, the fact is that more and more people are aware of what's going on than ever before, and that's really a positive sign for hope.
Lisa Graves, Executive Director at the Center for Media and Democracy. Thank you so much for coming on. What's your website?
Our main website is prwatch.org, but you can also find all of the work going on about ALEC almost at alecexposed.org, which is our site as well.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
You are listening to Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore, sponsored by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. We'll be right back after the break with Emmanuel Herman, Deputy Director of MoveOn.org, to talk more about what happened at ALEC's conference last week.
Americans of all ages and political parties agree they do not support cutting Social Security and Medicare benefits to pay for Washington's fiscal failures. Putting millions of middle-class and poor Americans and their families at risk in the name of deficit reduction is not fiscal responsibility. Social Security and Medicare strengthen our economy and our families. Call the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare at 1-800-966-1935 or visit us at thenationalcommittee.org. You can make a difference.
Social Security protects us against loss of income due to retirement, disability, or death. We pay into Social Security throughout our working lives, which is why we must stop Congress or the White House from cutting our earned benefits. Join our powerful national movement to protect Social Security for current and future generations. Call the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare at 1-800-966-1935 or visit us online at thenationalcommittee.org. You can make a difference.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
Welcome back to Pivot Point. I'm your host, Maya Rockeymoore. We are talking about ALEC Exposed, this conservative organization that has been focused on pushing conservative laws like Stand Your Ground and voter ID laws that restrict the right to vote in states across the country. And so our last guest was very illuminating, Lisa Graves of the Center for Media and Democracy, also the keeper of the website alecexposed.org, told us in detail about how corporations like Walmart, like the NRA, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and other organizations, both corporate and nonprofit, how they have in the past had relationships with ALEC that have pushed an agenda that has profited their bottom line. We are now joined by Emmanuel Herman, Deputy Director at MoveOn.org. Manny, as he is called, has worked as an online organizer for several years. He's worked at the ACLU, American Rights at Work, and is now the Deputy Director of Online Organizing at MoveOn.org, where he helps activists and organizations create petitions and really focuses on progressive change. Welcome, Manny.
Hi.
Listen, were you all involved in the conference last week in Chicago with ALEC?
Yes, we were, and we had activists on the ground at the ALEC protests last week, which were really awesome.
So tell us about what happened.
Well, I mean, we definitely turned out a lot of activists, and you know, we continue to see a lot of energy on ALEC. Basically, like throughout, over time, we found that especially during state legislative sessions, MoveOn members have really gotten involved by setting up a large number of petitions, both at the state level, targeting legislators. For example, in Pennsylvania, we had a petition urging legislators to quit ALEC or join the GOP, and that was actually very effective. We saw Democrats that were ALEC members quitting after that.
Wow.
And that was back in 2012. We've also seen corporate campaigns. So, for example, asking Publix supermarkets to quit ALEC.
And why were they a member of ALEC?
I'm not sure if they're actually still a member anymore. I think that they may still be, but basically, we'd like to have more boycott petitions. Actually, that's been an effective strategy as well.
Mm-hmm. And so, why does MoveOn view this as a priority issue then?
Well, actually, we made this big bet last December that we would open up our platform for members to run their own campaigns. And so this is a big priority because it's something that members care about, both in the sense of creating their own campaigns, and we continue to see energy on those member-created campaigns. And because, I think on a deep level, MoveOn members also really are fundamentally disturbed by a lot of the policies that ALEC has been promoting. So in addition to direct activism against ALEC, we've also seen a lot of energy against policies that ALEC pushes, like Stand Your Ground, for example. We had a huge amount of energy around Trayvon, both initially and then after the decision. And in the sort of interim period between those two things, we had a lot of anger at ALEC for pushing Stand Your Ground, and we had campaigns to stop Stand Your Ground in key states. And, of course, the strongest push to stop Stand Your Ground was in Florida, where Trayvon had happened, and where ALEC had pushed for that.
And we're seeing the Dream Defenders are still in the governor's office, still fighting, and I know that they're going to get their day in court, so to speak, in terms of a hearing in the Florida legislature on the Stand Your Ground law. But what other traction are we seeing across the country in terms of the possible repeal of Stand Your Ground laws?
We've seen some energy in a lot of places. New Hampshire was one in particular where, that would be sort of a surprising case, but we actually had a significant amount of energy there to repeal Stand Your Ground and petition with 1,600 signatures.
Yeah. Let me tell you, since you are an online organizing guru, I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago where they basically said that we read an article or a piece that said that, the notion of, people just clicking a button and saying that they support something as a substitute it was portrayed as something that is not as significant as taking action like going to vote or, calling a congressional office or visiting an office. And really poo-pooing the power of online organizing. What has your experience been?
My experience has been that online organizing is a great on-ramp into exactly the kinds of actions you're talking about. Mm-hmm. So, for example, Move On would not be able to turn people out to in-person events like the one in Chicago that you were mentioning if we didn't have an 8 million person member list that we built through petitions. And petitions, we have seen time and time again, like our tools actually allow petition creators to organize their own in-person events, including deliveries, rallies, and other sorts of offline actions. And so basically we allow for people, for our members to become leaders and run a full campaign, not just, start a petition and that's the end of it.
So how does that work, where you've given the members the power to do this? And have you seen, what is it, like a fifth of your membership, 1% actually takes you up on that?
What percentage actually of petition creators asks their people to go to a delivery or something? No,
what percentage of your total Move On membership actually decides to run their own campaign?
Over time, we've actually seen a pretty significant number. We have, let's see, I'd say it's probably, I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Basically, it takes time. You have to sort of get people on the ramp to leadership, but what we do is consistently ask people to start campaigns. And our goal is to dramatically increase the number of leaders over time, both by providing support, both by getting people to take the initial first step and by providing ongoing support to cultivate leaders. And we think that by cultivating leaders across the country, we can increase our political power.
And is there a ramp to leadership where there are defined steps, like a person may be a level 0, which is basically sign their name to a petition, Level 1, sign your name and then forward it to somebody else. Level 2, sign your name, forward it to somebody else, and then post it on your Facebook page. I mean, have you defined it? Has it become a science like that?
Yeah, I mean, in some ways it has. We have everything from, someone who just signs a petition and shares it, which is really important, actually, because you want a progressive movement that's both broad and has strong leaders. You can sort of think of it as a funnel almost, where basically if you have a broad base to start with, and you put that into the funnel, then on the other end emerge some very strong leaders. For example, like Robert Applebaum, who set up a petition to forgive student loan debt, got over 1 million signatures, and it actually resulted in a real change in policy. Or most recently, Madison Kimry, a 12-year-old activist in North Carolina who was upset at the recent voter suppression law that Governor Pat McCrory signed, set up a petition all by herself, and she's demanding a meeting with the governor.
Go Madison.
Yeah.
Madison. I'm gonna find her and certainly give a shout out because that's great. 12 years old.
Yeah, and so it's not I think none of this would be possible without starting with a broad base of activists that maybe, once upon a time came in through just clicking a petition. And it's true that not every single person who just signs a petition is going to start a petition and organize a rally, but we can make the progressive movement stronger by having more people take that first step and by encouraging them more over time.
Isn't it true that Move On is also sought to kind of reinforce this notion of community amongst your members by these meetups and other things that make it more personal?
Yes, we definitely have encouraged our members to meet offline in living rooms, at rallies, so that on the ground people have a sense of community. And also we have the Move On councils, which provide a sense of community in places across America.
Manny, my last question for you is that even though we have a Democratic administration in the executive branch, and we have a legislative branch that's half Democrat on the Senate side, and then, of course, Republican on the House side. It seems as if progressive issues have really been on the defensive, that despite the organizing that's taking place and the energy that we see around some of these things, it feels like that the battle is not necessarily, the momentum is not necessarily on our side. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I would agree, like, if you look at Washington, and, like, you know, Washington is broken. So, like, at the national level, certainly we've seen that, you know, MoveOn members have done what they've had to do, which is be on the defensive on issues like Social Security. Mm-hmm. And 92% of MoveOn members voted. You know, it was hard for them. These are folks who supported the president, the vast majority, right? 92% of them voted to oppose President Obama and opposing any cuts to Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid. And we're continuing to see that is basically one of the top issues. I think, you know, at the state level, on the other hand, and in, you know, one reason we've really encouraged people to take organizing into their own hands is that we have actually seen some progress on progressive issues. And, you know, going back to that student loan example at the national level, that was progress that, you know, really impacted people's lives. We've seen with implementing Obamacare at the state level, successful campaigns where Republican governors were pressed to support Obamacare implementation. So, like, those are actually, like, you know, we continue to see successes over time, you know, both on, like, federal issues occasionally, but also in the state level. And, yeah, you know, it can be frustrating when Washington's broken, but MoveOn members keep pushing.
Well, Manny, you sound like the eternal optimist, and I think as an organizer you have to be, because you know the battle is actually never over. Yep. So thank you. Manny Herman, Deputy Director on MoveOn.org. What website?
www.moveon.org. I'd encourage everyone to go there and start a petition.
All right. Very good. Manny, thanks.
Thanks.
You're listening to Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore, sponsored by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Stay with us after the break. We're going to carry this theme of ALEC, and we're going to talk to Austin Thompson of the SEIU, talking about how young people are engaged in the fight against ALEC.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
When I started working decades ago, I didn't know anything about Social Security or Medicare. I was too busy earning a living, buying a house, and raising a family. But life has a way of surprising us. A death in my family and disability first introduced me to Social Security. I'm counting on it when I retire, and thanks to Medicare, I know I'll have the health care I need in retirement. Social Security and Medicare are vital to millions of American families. They also contribute hundreds of billions of dollars to our economy each year. So why are some in Washington threatening benefit cuts to reduce the deficit? It makes no sense. Benefit cuts for the middle class and tax breaks for the wealthy is not fiscal responsibility. It's bad for our economy and even worse for our families. That's why I joined the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Together, we're working to ensure Washington strengthens the programs we paid into throughout our working lives. Call 1-800-966-1935 or visit online at thenationalcommittee.org. We can make a difference.
Welcome back to Pivot Point. I am your host, Maya Rockeymoore, and this show is sponsored by the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. It is my delight to welcome to the show Austin Thompson of the SEIU. He is a labor and community organizer who has made it his mission to see cities replace school-to-prison pipelines with pathways to good jobs. Welcome, Austin.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Listen, we've been talking throughout the show about ALEC, the conservative organization that has been behind the Stand Your Ground laws, voter ID laws, other laws that have been restrictive to our democracy and certainly a threat to the nation's health if you look at Stand Your Ground laws. What has been the youth role in agitating against ALEC?
Well, across the country, there's a number of things that are happening to young people, particularly young people of color. Of course, with the death of Trayvon Martin and the absence of the Zimmerman verdict, we've seen folks organizing around stand your ground type laws in 31 or more states. And of course, the Supreme Court's decision on the Voting Rights Act, which took away a very important part of that act, then led to governors, right-wing governors across the country, taking away important voter rights protections.
Austin, I think you're on a cell phone, which is having you cut in and out. So I need for you to speak really close to the phone, and if you can go by a window or something, it would be great.
Okay, can you hear me better now?
Yes, much better. Thank you so much. You're also the director of the Millennial Program at SEIU. Tell us about that.
So the Millennial Program is really looking at the next generation of labor and figuring out how in this current crisis we can encourage and inspire young workers to get involved in their local chapters, but also in the broader social justice movement.
Mm-hmm. So there are two interesting things here, and actually they're not separate. And what you're talking about is the labor movement, which is very, very weak right now. Labor is in retreat nationally across organizations, not just the SEIU, but and then the whole notion of young people's orientation towards labor and social justice. Now, I don't know if you know, Austin, but I wrote a book called The Political Action Handbook, a how-to guide for the hip-hop generation some time ago. And it was and this was in 2004. I was really wanting, young people to kind of get engaged in the political process. Since that time, they have gotten engaged in the political process. They have been really significant players in national elections. And now we see organizations like the Dream Defenders down in Florida really standing their ground, if you will, in the governor's office to fight the Stand Your Ground law. I'm wondering, Austin, are you optimistic about young people being engaged in this struggle for justice?
Well, I'm extremely optimistic, and the reason why is I remember when I was a kid, we used to say, what would be your superpower if you were a superhero, and I would always choose being invisible, because if you're invisible, then you can mess with people, and they wouldn't be able to find you or fight back. And we've had groups like ALEC or Corporate Power who've been behind the scenes and invisible. And now groups like the Dream Defenders, Malcolm X Grassroots Movement, and many others are starting to identify the actors who are pushing for legislation like Stand Your Ground. And that makes me really hopeful because you can't fight an enemy you can't see. And these organizations are starting to make those bad actors visible, and people are really organizing around.
Austin, you have just kind of blown my mind a little bit because everybody remembers The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. And this notion that, African American men and women to some extent are invisible when you're talking about larger American society. And when you look at things like the Zimmerman verdict, which discounted Trayvon Martin's life as if he did not matter, as if he did not have a right to stand his ground. And yet you say that there's power in being invisible. I'm captured by that. Are you saying that you have more latitude and leeway to fight back when people are not noticing you?
Well, a lot of our elected officials, whether we realize it or not, they often serve the interests of very powerful, wealthy financial entities, banks, corporations. And those banks and corporations, they're able to hide under the cover of groups like ALEC, while at the same time pushing for voting rights suppression or stand your ground laws or pushing for poverty wages. And because we don't necessarily know who they are, they operate under that cloak of invisibility. And we really have to ask ourselves, if we want to stop the crisis we're facing, how do we bring the crisis to the folks who are responsible? And that's the power that we have to start to stand up and change some of these laws.
Have you been in partnership with any of these other organizations, like the Dream Defenders of the Malcolm X and other organizations? Is there a forum where all of these kind of forward-thinking and insightful activists are getting together?
Well, I was part of a meeting in Chicago hosted by the Black Youth Project, and there were 100 activists from across the country representing many, many different organizations, and we came together and did some power mapping, both to identify who are the entities who are behind the scenes pushing these model legislation, and then also what are the strategies and tactics we need to move them back. And the Black Youth Project, the Black Youth 100, you can Google and find a lot of videos and information. We just released a toolkit earlier this week around Trayvon Martin and what other young people could do to fight back.
And so what do you see as the next steps in terms of not only just organizing against ALEC, but also against any number of injustices that are still taking place, not just, I think, on the race dimension, but also on the labor, the worker rights dimension?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say that the two things have to come together. And one of the next steps is labor and community organizing have to stop being siloed, and we need to find bridges between the two. For example, I've been really inspired by the Fight for 15 campaign in Chicago, where retail and fast food workers are demanding $15 an hour. But they also live in communities that are facing home foreclosure and gun violence. So the extent to which we win is the extent to which we can tie those things together and build a broad-based movement for justice.
You know, you remind me of my friend, and actually, as I say it, his name is blocking out. He actually does political commentating for the Tom Joyner Morning Show. Jeff, do you know Jeff?
I don't.
Yeah, he used to have a show on BET talking about politics. They called him Cousin Jeff. But your voice sounds just like his, but your attitude and your spirit is the same as well. How do you get fed? I mean, when you look around and you see all this injustice, how do you actually get up every day and keep going?
That's a great question. Right now I'm in Los Angeles with one of SEIU's locals, the United Long-Term Care Workers. And what keeps me going is being in spaces like this where I interact with young home care workers who are mostly women who all of their lives have told they have no power. But by coming together through power in numbers, are standing up, finding their voice, and changing their communities. And this Saturday, there's going to be a massive community event planned by these long-term care workers at Dodger Stadium, where they're doing haircuts and things like that. So that's what keeps me going, are the small victories where people realize their power to change the world.
And is SEIU engaged? When I think long-term care workers and when I think healthcare workers, I know that a significant portion of these workers are actually, many of are immigrants or undocumented workers. Is SEIU really engaged in the battle for immigration reform?
Absolutely. In fact, a few weeks ago, one of our executive vice presidents, Eliseo Medina, was arrested in Washington, D.C. to put some urgency behind the House, both the GOP and the Democrats, to move forward on a bill for common sense immigration reform. And of course, we fought very hard to get a bill passed through the Senate, which isn't exactly what we would have wanted, but it is a pathway to citizenship for a lot of folks. So SEIU is looking forward to, after the August recess, folks coming back together and voting for common sense immigration reform. We got to get it.
And tell me this, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I'm 26.
And how did you kind of become conscious? What was your journey?
Well, I grew up in a southern small town in Georgia, and my governor at the time, who was a Democrat, decided to remove the Confederate flag from our state flag, and it sparked some unrest among people I thought were my friends and neighbors, and they wanted to protect that emblem. And so it forced me to ask, who am I in relationship to history, and what kind of world do I want to live in? And I very quickly went from there to understanding power and relations of power, and how power is not this abstract thing, but it's a relationship that we can change. And so I've been ever since organizing to alter power relations and make life better for people who are at the bottom of the well.
And did you get that through high school or college in formal courses, or did you have to seek it out elsewhere?
I mostly sought it out elsewhere through reading, and I spent a lot of time traveling throughout the world, experiencing social movement unions and young people's organizations, and all of those things inspired me. But nothing has inspired me more than the stories of my grandparents who were in the Jim Crow South, and their dignity and defiance against white supremacy in the South has also helped me shape my perspective on the world.
Well, that's amazing that you have that kind of view of history. I'd like to congratulate you for that. I myself am fourth generation from slavery on my mother's side, and I think many young people today, especially in the African American community, have no knowledge of that history or desire to even know it. And then to ask the question about what is their relationship now to that history and what it means for your lived experience in terms of engaging the challenges we face today. I just really congratulate you. I think that you are, for a 26-year-old, highly evolved, and I look forward to meeting you one day in person, Austin Thompson. Thank you so much for coming on my show.
Thank you.
Please give our listening audience your website and where they can go specifically to learn more about the Millennial Program.
You can visit our SEIU Millennials Facebook page by Googling SEIU Millennials. And I would also encourage folks, if you're coming to the March on Washington next week in D.C., you can visit this website for youth events. It's http://MOW-WeGotNext.tumblr.com.
Well, actually, you just brought up something. I'm so sorry, because you just brought up something that I failed to ask. And since I have your brilliance on the phone, I've got to ask you this, and this is the final question, and that is that, now that we're at this 50th anniversary point of the March on Washington, what is the unfinished work left to be done, and what role does the Obama administration have in leading that effort?
I think that despite the enormity of the civil rights movement of the 1960s, there were many limitations. For one, the role of women. Another problem was the model of leadership, where an individual kind of rose to prominence. And it also excluded a lot of poor folks and LGBT communities. And so one thing that's going to be different this time around is we're going to win more because we're more inclusive, because women are at the forefront, because poor folks, because LGBT communities, and all the folks who've been excluded from movements of the past are now front and center. And in terms of what President Obama's role should be, I think that question is up to us. It's, can we continue to push the administration as we have done around mass incarceration and drug laws, where we just saw Attorney General Holder come out with a statement on mandatory minimums? Can we continue to put that fire at the feet of the administration and hold them accountable for the values they claim to stand for?
And the answer is absolutely yes. Thank you, Austin Thompson. See you next week in Washington.
See you.
All right. This has been another great edition of Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore. I have been absolutely floored by the information, the great information that we've gotten today. Lisa Graves started us off by giving us excellent insight in terms of who the ALEC supporters are, how organizations like Walmart and NRA have used and worked in alignment with ALEC to get stand your ground laws pushed across the country, other kinds of laws that have been harmful to our democracy as well. Then we went to Manny Herman, who really kind of gave some fantastic insight in terms of online organizing and how they managed to generate a lot of participation last week at the ALEC conference. More than 3,000 organizers outside protesting ALEC, and they had 1,500 people on the inside, so that's pretty significant. And finally, Austin Thomas of SEIU, he runs the Millennial Program there, has been fabulous in giving us his insight as a young, and I'm assuming African-American brother who really kind of is brilliant. And he's on the cutting edge, I think, of a new generation of activists who are committed to fighting for social justice, and there is hope out there, and I am so proud of Austin Thompson. So I'd like to thank my listening audience for joining me for yet another edition of Pivot Point with Maya Rockeymoore. Special shout out, of course, as always, to the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare for sponsoring this show, and much appreciation to my production team comprised of Peter James Callahan, Melissa Byrne, and Dylan Gibson for their fabulous work in putting together this show. I would like to remind you that we come on every Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time here at We Act Radio. If you're in the D.C. area, that's 1480 a.m. But also Thursday mornings. It's exciting that we're on Thursday mornings at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. So please join us every Thursday and Sunday to your delight. Until next time, America.
When I started working decades ago, I didn't know anything about Social Security or Medicare. I was too busy earning a living, buying a house, and raising a family. But life has a way of surprising us. A death in my family and disability first introduced me to Social Security. I'm counting on it when I retire, and thanks to Medicare, I know I'll have the health care I need in retirement. Social Security and Medicare are vital to millions of American families. They also contribute hundreds of billions of dollars to our economy each year. So why are some in Washington threatening benefit cuts to reduce the deficit? It makes no sense. Benefit cuts for the middle class and tax breaks for the wealthy is not fiscal responsibility. It's bad for our economy and even worse for our families. That's why I joined the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Together, we're working to ensure Washington strengthens the programs we paid into throughout our working lives. Call 1-800-966-1935 or visit online at thenationalcommittee.org. We can make a difference.
You're listening to We Act Radio, WPWC 1480 AM. Visit us online at weactradio.com.
What's up, everybody? This is Frank Knuckles from the legendary Roots Crew, and you're listening to right now We Act Radio. Stay tuned, stay locked.